One afternoon, I was at work. I walked past a room with a window in the door and automatically glanced in the window. There was a woman standing in the room. Except there are only three people in the building, and the other two were in the office behind me. I took a couple steps, realized what I had just seen, and backed up quickly. But by the time I got back to the window, the room was empty. There was only one door, and when I opened it, the room was empty. At the same building, a coworker was telling me that she was in the office right around the corner from that same room. She couldn't see the door, but she could see the shadow of the door on the floor as it slowly opened and closed. She was the only one in the building at the time, and she refused to check. I arrived about an hour later and she asked me to check the door, and it was still locked. I worked there about 3 years, and every single one of us had stories. We heard voices in empty rooms. Once we were sitting in the office and we heard somebody breathing in an empty corner. It was common to be in one of the rooms and think somebody had just walked into the room, only to look up and find that the room was empty except for you. I had one manager who scoffed at all of our stories. She did not believe us when we told her there was something fairly benign but creepy in the building. We were sitting in the office. She scoffed and loudly said, "If there's anything in here, prove it." We all held our breath, kind of nervous, a bit scared, but also curious. And just about the time my manager was getting that look on her face that said, "Ha, told you so," something was thrown out in the hallway. It took us several minutes to work up the courage before going to check and finding that a book that normally sat on a bookshelf near the front door had somehow gone from that bookshelf around the corner and halfway down the hallway. The manager never talked about it and quit shortly after that. I have since quit also, but last I heard they were still hearing voices and seeing shadows in the building. I want to clarify something before I start. I was very young at the time and only have vague recollections of this house. But everyone in my wider family remembers it. So I'll give the few examples I remember and then family stories. My cousins had a holiday house somewhere in the north of the country that we all called the bog after the peat fields that surrounded the house. I will list all known hauntings that we have experienced there and by whom. My family. Lights turning off and on by themselves in different rooms. Strange footsteps along the corridor. My brother's nightlight that was powered by a battery would randomly turn itself off and on even when we changed the batteries, and it worked perfectly fine at our house. Teddies thrown around the playroom or hidden somewhere different to where I put them down. My mom experienced a situation at night where she heard the door open and little footsteps on the floor. So she opened the bed sheets as she thought it was me coming in for a snuggle, and nothing was there. My grandmother. When she entered the house for the first time, she put her suitcase by the front door and went to grab her handbag. She walked in the house to find her suitcase missing. When she walked upstairs to the room she usually stays in, her suitcase was on her bed. She was annoyed, so loudly said, "Now I don't want any of this behavior, you understand?" And never experienced any other paranormal situations. Cousin A. 1. Lights would randomly shut in the room you were in but not in any other room. 2. Foul smells would erupt randomly. 3. Items would go missing and turn up in places you would have never put them. Grandfather 1. Went for a walk in the countryside one morning with his partner and came back to the house to find all the beds in two bedrooms flipped on their backs, frames facing the ceiling. Obviously, they went to check the house for animal entry and came back blank. There was no sign of any kind of forced entry within the house. He left later that day and swore he would never step foot in that damn house. However, the weirdest possible thing about this house, the cousins who owned it never saw anything and said nothing happened to them. They are also extremely wealthy and had the house completely gutted and remodeled before they even used it as a holiday home. So it had new electricity and plumbing. To this day, it's the only paranormal experience my family and I have ever had. And while I'm very skeptic about most paranormal activity, this is just unexplainable to us. One night I was watching The Conjuring at home with my little sister when we heard someone putting a key into our front door and opening it. We were sitting in the living room next to a sliding door that was very close to the front door, so we both heard it very clearly. Now, this didn't alarm us since we knew our dad had recently gone out to get some stuff, so we just assumed he had returned. Dad, you are back already? I casually asked. There was no response. Dad, I asked again, thinking that he had not heard me the first time. Again, silence. At this point, I get the feeling that something isn't quite right, and I could tell by the look on my sister's face that she was quite nervous as well. I'll note that up to this point, she had spent the evening rolling her eyes at horror movie cliches and she very rarely gets scared. We looked at each other for a moment, wondering what we should do before we started hearing a few more scattering sounds from right outside the sliding door. I was frozen in fear by this stage. I tried one more time in a louder but shakier voice. Dad, is that you? Please respond, repeated in my head, but the silence continued. Now, at this point, I am freaking out, and I literally jumped off the couch. My sister also abruptly gets up and starts rapidly walking towards the other end of the room, which leads to the kitchen area. She later revealed to me that she was planning on grabbing a knife. She had this horrified look on her face that I hadn't seen before. We looked at each other in nervous silence. I didn't really know what to do and I didn't want to make any further sounds. I finally decided to walk up to the sliding door and begin opening it as slowly as possible, peering into the darkness. I know I literally became the idiot who investigates the unknown creepy noise without anything to protect myself with. When the door was finally opened wide enough, I poked my head out and scanned the corridor, preparing for the worst. To my surprise, there was no one there. But what was more strange was that the front door was still completely shut, like we had never heard the door open and close. My sister and I were obviously both extremely relieved, as we were almost certain there was an intruder in the house. After this, I immediately went to go ask my mom, who was situated in her bedroom at the other end of our house, if it was her or whether she had noticed anything. She told me that she thought my dad had come home as well as she also heard someone opening the front door. Around half an hour later, which felt like an eternity at that time, as we were still quite shaken from the incident, my dad finally arrived home and confirmed that he had not come home earlier. To this day, my sister and I still have no idea what happened that night. As I am not a believer in ghosts, etc., I would put this under unexplained, but I know a few people I have told this story to who would say otherwise. At the time, I am probably 16 or 17, and as such, one of the older members of our Boy Scout troop. Our troop travels to upstate New York, Indian Lake. It's a state park with campsites that are on islands in a lake. The only way to access the campsites are by boat. The scoutmasters reserved enough campsites for the number of scouts and parents going, but when we arrive, we realize that the sites are split on separate islands. In fact, one of the sites is all by itself. Myself and my two friends, being the elder scouts, decide we will take this site and have it to ourselves. The canoe trip from the main island to ours was probably a 30 to 60-minute canoe ride away. Adults stopped by in some motorized boats to drop off some food, but otherwise we had the site to ourselves. In fact, a quick 5-minute walk around the island's empty campsites confirmed that we had the entire island to ourselves. No one was using the other sites located on the island. As night falls, we build a fire, make our burgers, eat our snacks, and shoot the shit. I'm sitting at the picnic bench when from the nearby trees comes a growling and barking. My buddy John is frozen, already someone who was afraid of dogs. Paul is the only one who can get a good look at it as it was obscured to my eyesight by our tent. He too is frozen, handling his flashlight like a weapon but afraid to turn it on. For the longest 10 minutes of our life, the growling and barking continues. The sight lines and darkness made it difficult for us to identify what type of animal it was. Our guess was a dog as opposed to a wolf, but at no time did we hear its owners. And after all, we are on an island, a 30-minute canoe ride from where anyone might be with a dog. Eventually, the animal left the site. We stayed still for 15 minutes more, making sure it was gone. Being the youthful, scared idiots that we were, we retreated to the place where we felt safe, our tent. There we stood with our flashlights, ready to beat anything that might attack. We planned on taking shifts, staying awake in case it came back, but eventually all succumbed to sleep. With daylight upon us, we took a walk once again around the island, looking for any signs of the animal or any other campers that may have arrived later the previous night. We didn't find anything. This isn't a story involving me. It was actually when my mom was little kid, so I have only heard this story from my grandma who likes to tell me things like this when I visit her. My grandma was traveling with my mom and her three younger siblings. One of them was a baby and the others were toddlers or just young kids. Of course, handling three hyper kids and one baby on an airplane isn't that fun, and my grandma was beyond exhausted by the time they took their seats. My grandma chose a back row on the flight, sitting with the two youngest, while my mom sat in the other row with her sister. Things quieted down for a bit when they took off, but as time went on, my mom and her siblings grew more restless. Lots of whining, complaining, and crying that made my grandma wish she could just sleep and forgot it all. Just as my grandma's about to lose it, a man sitting behind her taps her shoulder and my grandma turns to look at him. He frowns, noticing how tired she is, and asks if she would like help calming down her crazy kids. Of course, my grandma is so done that she quickly agrees. Side note, nowadays I don't think people would be so quick to hand over their babies, but this was back when strangers were a lot more chill with each other, so I guess that explains that. My grandma quietly breathes, a wave of relief washing over her as the man hands my mom and her sisters coloring books and quiets down the baby by dangling an interesting toy over the seat. And for the rest of the plane ride, everything was quiet. My grandma says it was the most quiet she had ever been since my mom was born. The plane lands. My grandma thanks the man and starts getting my mom and her siblings ready to get off the plane. Of course, she is really excited to introduce this man she befriended on the flight to my grandpa and tell him how he saved her from a hell of a flight. My grandma gets off the plane with everyone and meets up with my grandpa. She proceeds to excitedly tell him all the details and that he should wait with them to meet the man. After all, the man was behind them and would be one of the last ones to get off the plane. They were both in back rows, remember? 10 minutes went by, then 15. They had been watching people get off the whole time, but the man never showed up. My grandma was incredibly puzzled by this. How could he have possibly disappeared when they were sitting in front of him and had gotten off the plane before him? My grandma, worried that something happened to him, stopped one of the crew members who had a list of all people on the flight. She asked for his name, which she had learned on the flight, only to be given this response: "Sorry, ma'am, there's no man's name on this list." To this day, no one knows quite for sure who this man really was or where he could have gone. My grandma and I think that he was some sort of guardian angel or spirit sent to help her in a time of need. I don't know why, but my childhood house was haunted even though it wasn't even that old. I think it was like built 4 years beforehand. Anyways, the house was just weird. My parents never believed my siblings and I, but when we were alone, we would see shadows out of the corner of our eyes. When watching TV, you could see into the hallway and into the guest bedroom and just always see something there. And I remember we always kept the door closed for that reason. One night, I was up for whatever reason, probably like 10 or something, and my sister suddenly calls my name at like 1 a.m. We shared a room and she scared the shit out of me. I answer back and she's all like, "Did you hear that girl crying?" And I asked, "What the fuck does she mean?" And she says, she heard a little girl crying in front of our window. Now I'm freaking out because my bed was next to the window and that window faced the front yard so anyone could gain access. But the craziest thing was that I didn't hear a thing. I told her to shut up and tried to go to sleep, even though it freaked me out. Probably at 3 a.m., I am woken up by the probably same girl crying right outside. I was scared, but I just tried my best to ignore it. We discussed it in the morning and we were really hoping it was our little brother. It was a long shot, but we asked him and he said no, it wasn't him. He thought we were the ones crying, and he was on the opposite end of the house, and of course, my parents didn't hear shit. But one that actually happened directly to me was when I was like 11 or 12. My parents went to work at 4 or 6 a.m. and they would wake me up to go sleep with my little brother as he had a problem sleeping by himself and would cry when they left. I was fine with it, but I would be the first to wake from my siblings to get ready for school. It was probably like 7:40 when my alarm went off and I got up to use the restroom. As I am sitting up, clear as day, as I hear a man with the deepest voice ever go, "Don't go, stay with me." And I just froze. After a couple minutes, I just laid back down and hoped it was over. After my second alarm to wake up my siblings went off, I got up because I didn't hear anything else for 20 minutes. My brother, who was right next to me, didn't hear anything, and neither did my sister. No one in my family has a voice that deep, let alone no one in the house could speak like that, as we were two 12-year-old girls and a 5-year-old boy. But I never heard talking after that, and we moved when I was 13 years old. We always told my mom about this, and she never believed us. Not a single child she believed until one night we all just sat down and talked, and she told us how she also felt it but thought we were being dramatic. Until one day her friend felt the biggest slap on her head from nothing. Again, no one there. Then my mom started wondering if maybe we were telling the truth, especially since years have passed and we all were stuck with the same story. Never experienced anything like that again. I don't really believe in the paranormal. In fact, I don't really believe it at all. But I do have a few stories that stick with me that are unexplainable to my brain even years later with a more adult and reasonable thought process. The first that comes to mind is one that I always tell my friends that gives me chills and freaks me out and will always make me feel some type of way for the foreseeable future. I was probably 9 or 10 at the time and my dad was in the military. We were stationed in Fort Knox and lived on base in a provided military apartment. I moved around a lot growing up and have plenty of superstitious family members. So, at the time of being a child, the fear of the supernatural always existed. I lived pretty normally and then I made a friend named Dylan. Hope he's doing well these days. One day after school, his mom invited me over to their home. They also lived on base. Right away entering that apartment, I felt very uneasy or like someone was watching me. However, as the day went by, I played with him and his little sister and things were normal. Nothing amiss, and so on his birthday, I returned to his home for the final time. When I came through the door again, I got that uneasy feeling. This time I asked him about it, and his demeanor changed as well as little sister's. He didn't really want to talk about it. Being young, I found that to be a bit strange. As his birthday went on, I find myself needing to use the bathroom. There were two bathrooms, one upstairs and one downstairs. I went to enter the bathroom downstairs, and without a missed breath, him and his sister both say, "We don't use that bathroom, don't go in there." I didn't really think much of it until he asked if I would stand outside the door of the upstairs bathroom while he used it. Things now seemed off, and that uneasy feeling sank in. I complied. We went upstairs, he went to pee and left the door wide open and asked me not to let anyone shut it, which freaked me out because it was just me and him upstairs. I was dying to piss and asked if he would stand outside because now I was nervous, to which he refused. Angry that he didn't return the favor, I stormed off downstairs, yanked the bathroom door open, and meant to take a piss. 10-year-old, pants halfway down, I am about to ready to piss when the lights go off. The switch is inside as well as the lock, which frightens me because now I can't see and I have my pants down. Then it flicks back on and then off again, and then it begins happening a lot more rapidly. What gives me chills is that to this day, I distinctly remember seeing the light switch flip itself up and down on its own. This picks up. Now a terrified 9 or 10-year-old, I begin to panic and try to open the door. I got the door open at about a head's width and it slammed on me really hard. Lights are still flickering. I open it again and go to step out and it slams on me even harder. Now crying for his mom or anyone because the lights are flickering and the door is slamming on me. His mom hears me play and is yanking on the door to which I am pushing. Finally the door flung open and both her and I went falling forward at the force. I cried and went home. It really ruined me being friends with Dylan and we never talked about it. I remember later my mom asked if I remembered that story and told me his mother called and apologized. She also proceeded to tell my mom further that her and her husband had been experiencing a lot of things in the apartment. One being that she would wake up in the night to something raising the covers off of her husband and whispering his name. I don't believe in ghosts, but that is one of the most terrifying and unexplainable portions of my childhood and any experience unlike any other. Three apartments I have lived in my lifetime. First apartment, late 90s. I was 3 when we moved out, so these are my mom's stories. The apartment smelled of lilacs. When she used her computer, it felt like someone was standing over her watching her. My biological dad always had issues with the apartment. He said it stunk of rot and decay and it was creepy and he couldn't sleep when he stayed over. My mom would hear footsteps above her even when the upstairs apartment was vacant and smell cigarettes in her kitchen even though she didn't smoke. One time when I was learning to talk, I kept saying, "Hi Baba," to the wall and waving, and my mom said, "I'm trying to put her to sleep, could you leave us be?" And I followed whatever it was out of the room with my eyes and then said, "Bye bye Baba." My Baba was very much still alive in the late 90s. One night, my mom woke up suddenly and there was a short elderly woman in a nightdress standing in her bedroom doorway with her head down, and she looked at my mom, left the room and went down the hall, and my mom heard her footsteps, followed her, and she just vanished in the kitchen. Where the woman had been walking smelled of lilacs. All the doors and windows were locked. Second apartment. Our apartment we lived in through the 2000s. We have learned since moving out that the house was built in the 1860s and passed from father to son till the 1970s when it was converted into an apartment and a law office. The apartment was the back addition and the upstairs of the original house. My mom would frequently see a man dressed in World War I era clothes, skulking around her car in the evenings, and if she had to go to the garage at night where the freezer was, he would be standing in the garage but would vanish into thin air. She also saw him standing by our front door when we were coming home and it was raining heavily, and also once saw him standing behind her in the bathroom mirror. There was also a woman in a blue dress who walked up and down the hallway between my room and my mom's room in the old part of the house. I remember being afraid to go to washroom at night because I was afraid to run into the woman. I also once saw her in the living room late at night when I went to the washroom and she told me to go back to bed. When my little brother was 3 or 4, my mom woke up feeling like she was being shaken and a woman saying, "Your son is outside." And my mom found my brother had sleepwalked himself downstairs and opened the door and was standing in the open doorway. Third apartment. My first apartment with my husband was in a really rundown old house. The rooms we occupied would have originally been a nursery, children's bedchamber, and a nanny's room. My husband frequently worked till 11 or 12 at night, so I was often home alone there at night. I used to order food in a lot and meet the delivery driver down by the road because the house was kind of hard to find. Two apartment buildings had been built in front of it, and there was a small laneway to get to the house between them. But unless you were looking for the house, it looked like from the road the apartments were 19, 23, and 21 was missing. Anyway, several times I looked back up at my apartment to see a man standing in the window, but my apartment was empty and locked when I came back upstairs. My husband and I would also hear children laughing. Doors and cupboards would open and close on their own. When I was home alone late at night, it felt like a male presence was standing over me and was upset and angry I was in his space. About 6 months into living there, a pipe burst and the damage required one of the original chandelier decoration pieces in the ceiling to be covered up, and the whole time they were doing the reno, anytime we were in the hallway, there was a vibe like a woman was incredibly angry that her home was being destroyed. Finally, we would frequently see a black cat out of the corner of our eyes, but we have two black cats, so we just assumed it was one of our boys. Except for when we were moving out, we sent our cats to stay with my parents near where we were moving to because our apartment was being shown while we still lived there, and the strangers in the apartment was incredibly upsetting to the cats. Anyway, that week we were in the apartment without our cats. We still kept seeing a black cat. I shut him in a kitchen cupboard once and said, "Sorry, Frey." One of ours opened the cupboard to let him out, and as I was opening the cupboard, I remembered our cats weren't there anymore. Also, the cupboard was empty. Other random creepy things. My youngest brother had an imaginary friend called Belvin who stuck around until my brother was like 6 or 7 at least, and Belvin would frequently tell my brother to kill us and to do dumb stuff like play with knives and matches and jump out windows and out of cars, but my brother knew that he shouldn't do what Belvin said. My brother-in-law had an imaginary friend called Otis who would run alongside their car when they were driving through forests, and one time my mother-in-law was playing with glow sticks with him in the bath and he told her, "Mum, Otis is standing right behind you." And my mother-in-law freaked out and turned the lights on and made him get out of the bath. When my daughter was just learning to laugh, she was laughing hysterically at something behind us that we couldn't see, and then the next night, my husband had a dream where his grandpa Doug told him he had a beautiful baby girl, and when my husband woke up, the frog plushie that grandpa Doug used to keep on his pool table that we now keep on a bookshelf in the living room was sitting on my husband's chair in the kitchen, but I didn't touch it, and our bookshelf is glass fronted, so it's not like the cats could have carried it off. All of my experiences revolve around our old property out in the middle of nowhere, WV. There are many, so I'm just gonna recount some of the more memorable ones. I can remember weird things consistently happening throughout my childhood. A little background on the property. Approximately 2 acres. All that was on the property when my parents bought it were these 3 or 4 sheds, and the old property owner, Teddy, was your standard early 90s backcountry hick, drunk, bad tempered, and filled with bad decisions. The story goes that Teddy and the surrounding neighbors used to get trashed and play poker at the property. One night, Teddy gets into an argument with a neighbor over the winnings, and as the neighbor goes to leave, Teddy shoots him in the back at the bottom of the driveway, and neighbor dies instantly. Anyways, fast forward a couple of years, and my parents have built a home. I can always remember feeling odd at night when looking out the front door at the beginning of our driveway, like someone was just standing down there waiting for something. And every once in a while, my mom or I would catch a glimpse of a man in a white shirt standing on the hill overlooking the end of our driveway back to us. Never anything more than a quick glimpse. Every time we tried to look back, the image was gone. I don't remember this specifically, but both my mom and dad a little less enthusiastically because he truly believed in these things, and I believe he was honestly a little scared. Said that I used to play with a little boy on my swing set, and I used to talk and push him on the swings, make him mud pies all the time until I just stopped. Our back door to the house would randomly open and close as if someone was coming into the house for the night. My dad used to make jokes that at least Teddy closes the door. When we upgraded to a fridge with the ice/water dispenser, the door would open and the water dispenser being depressed/water being poured from the fridge, but there was never any water coming from the fridge. I always tried to peek around the corner and never was there water on the ground or on the fridge itself. Maybe Teddy's thirsty was the new joke then. There was one that happened when I was probably around 6 or so. That was the first time I ever felt truly scared, and that was probably just because of how freaked out my mom was. It was midwinter and snowing like crazy. When it snows in the middle of nowhere, it gets this eerie, dark, and quiet to it that can be quite peaceful. I don't remember anything from the night except that the dogs were barking like crazy. We had chickens and goats, so my dad was worried maybe something was outside trying to get to the chickens, so he kept stepping outside on the porch, the flashlight, but couldn't see anything amiss. The dogs just wouldn't shut up though. Eventually, everyone settles down and I wake up before anyone else does, as usual, and go wake the parents up. Dad immediately gets dressed to go see if there were any prints outside the chicken coop and comes back in to grab my mom. I wanted to go outside to play, so we all go back out, and my mom and dad were looking at those front footprints around the house. I don't think anything of it and continue on, but when I was a teenager, my mom told me that story again and how the footprints were so odd. They were human shoes, but they didn't show any signs of entering our property. The footprints seriously just made circles around the house. No other trails to show that someone came up to the property or left the property. It was like someone touched down outside of our house and circled it a couple times, then just floated right back off with no indicators on where they came from. The story still freaks my mom out. My father passed away in the living room of the house with a rather accurate time frame he himself had set out, which seems to be common with cancer patients. He used to tell me his dead family would come to visit him at night. Anyways, after he passed, the happenings, as my mother and I used to call them, became an almost daily occurrence. Most of it centered around the living room. Anytime we mentioned my father, something strange would occur. At first, it was just little things disappearing from where we had placed them, and being missing for days before being put right back where they were used supposed to be. A stupid game my dad used to play on my mom all the time, always said the fairies and gnomes are taking it. But after a while of my mom and I just laughing it off as common mistakes, the incidents ramped up in speed. The TV would turn on in the living room. It was kind of older, so it made the whole static sound as it started up, and you could hear it turn on and off when in other rooms. Kind of freaked me out, but it only went to the static, so thought maybe the house had a power surge or something with that specific outlet. Continued to do it. Mom and I started to address it when it turned on. Hey hun slash dad, thanks for letting us know you are here. Kinda bullshit. Finally escalated one day when my sister came to visit. The TV turned on as we were telling my sister about the whole incident. We rush into the living room so she can see it, and the TV is actually flipping through channels. It isn't hooked up to anything, no cable, no remote, yet somehow the TV was switching through the static channels, fast but slow enough you could catch the numbers in the right corner. My mom turned it off, and that was the first time we started to get a little freaked out by it. Mom moved the TV eventually, and we put our biggest stereo out in the living room. Now, the stereo would randomly turn on and wouldn't be on the station we usually had it on. We listened to pop slash rap, so our station was 94.1. My father was a hardcore old country fan, so his station was 104.1. Anyways, we only ever listened to 94.1 and the thing wasn't programmable. So when we turned it off, it stayed on the station you had set it to. The radio, somehow, every single time it turned itself on, would quickly change channel from 94.1 to 104.1. It was eerie because you could hear the pop song at first and then within seconds static and then the wailings of the guitar in some old country song. It was interesting, slightly scary, but I never really felt threatened, just weirded out, like it shouldn't be happening yet here it is kinda thing. I used to stay at home by myself a lot as a teenager after my father passed, but the first night I ever truly got terrified was the night I saw my father in the living room just watching me. I was doing the dishes, the radio was on, it was getting close to dark, so I decided to go turn the lights on in the living room. Walked from the kitchen to the other side of the living room, turned the lights on, turned around, and he was just standing there at the entrance to the kitchen. It was him, but it was only a glimpse, and I could basically see through him. But it was his silhouette and his favorite muscle shirts he used to wear. It stopped me dead in my tracks and honestly did scare me quite a bit. I remember my mom asking why I had all the lights on when she came home that night. And then, to top of the radio story, we decided to paint the living room and had everything unplugged, pulled away from the wall. We were in the kitchen doing something, and the radio turned on to my father's station. My mom and I looked at each other wide eyed, and then I started laughing about dad wanting us to know he was still watching us destroy his house. Mom was obviously still very shaken and walked into the living room and picked up the power cord to the stereo and shrieked that it was unplugged. The music just kept playing for a couple more seconds and then the radio went black again. We sat and cried for a while. That was honestly the last time we ever had any sort of experiences in that house. Sold the property and moved away, but I want to go back and ask people if they have seen anything or heard anything. When I moved into my rental, I found a cupboard air freshener thing in one of the bedrooms that has a tag on it that says, "In memory of Nancy." I felt awkward removing something like that, so I have left it to be in the cupboard. We have had guests who stay in that room say that they feel uncomfortable or that it gets cold in there randomly and that bedroom door slams shut the most. My partner and I often joke that when a door slams for no reason or we can't find things, that it must be Nancy. There are three Nancy related instances that stand out. I had a nightmare that there was someone living in the roof. I woke up and laughed about it with my partner and roommate and carried on with my day. Later that afternoon, my roommate and I are getting into my car in the garage, and I happen to look up and notice that the manhole cover to access the room is not covering the manhole. Now the manhole cover doesn't sit flush with the roof. There is about a 3-inch rise up into the roof where it sits, so it's not something that can be moved easily by wind. The roof also happens to be quite high. My 6'3" partner needs a ladder to access the manhole, which we don't have. My partner ended up using a chair and sticking his phone up through the hole to get a video of what was up there, since neither of us were tall enough to get up without a ladder. There was nothing in there, thankfully, but the manhole cover was a good 3 meters away from the opening. We have no idea how this could have happened, so we have blamed it on Nancy. Another time was when I was home alone and about to start work. My work shift was out on the line, and as I walked outside, I vividly remember thinking that what if I get locked out? Because of this, I carefully closed the doors, a big sliding door and a small flimsy screen door behind me. I have indoor cats that I don't let outside, which is why I close them behind me. After I grab my shirt, I try to open the doors and the flimsy screen door opens, but the big glass door is locked. The lock on this door is a really solid lock and it takes efforts to close and has to be pushed in an upwards movement to lock with a loud audible click. I refuse to believe that this was an accident. I closed the door gently, didn't hear the click, plus the upwards movement and effort it takes to lock it is pretty unlikely that it happened accidentally. All the other doors and windows were locked, so I had to wait 2 hours for my partner to finish work and let me back inside. The only other time this door has locked itself was when my roommate went outside to smoke and my partner and I were watching a movie in the lounge room in full view of the door. She closed the door gently, and when she finished her cigarette, she tried to come inside and the door was locked. She too couldn't believe that it had locked itself and was sure my partner and I had locked her out, despite it being a glass door, and we all remained in full view of each other for the whole time. So yeah, I'm pretty sure I live with a ghost named Nancy that likes to move things, slam doors and lock people out.